everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. I am part of Power to Fly's hosting team, and I am, as always, incredibly excited and honored to get to host another Power to Fly Chat and Learn event for all of you. Now, before we dive in and start with introductions and get to questions, I just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. This will be especially helpful if maybe you haven't been to an event in a while, in which case we're so happy to see you again. Or maybe this is your first event with Power to Fly. And if that's the case, hi, welcome. We're so happy to have met you. So the biggest thing to know about these events is that they are all about you. They are about our community members, our audience. We want to make sure that the time that you spend with Power to Fly is well worth it. So we encourage you to participate in a bunch of different ways, however you prefer. So one of the ways we encourage it is by turning on your cameras. Please feel free to share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. Now, no need truly to be Instagram perfect. We do not care if you are coming to us from your living room couch or a corner office. You could be in a three-piece suit or your bathrobe. We do not care, y'all. We want to meet you where you are, bring you the resources, advice, expertise, and help and support that we can. So please do not stand on ceremony. We would love to have you join us. Now, there's no need to worry if you have any privacy concerns. As long as you stay muted during today's event, you will not show up on the live stream or the recording, no matter if your camera's on or off. Won't matter. It won't change that. So if that's of a concern for you, there you go. Now, if you want to participate, but you don't want to do so with your camera, that is totally fine. Y'all completely free to participate elsewhere. So I want to drag everybody's direct everybody's attention to the group chat. If you're not sure how to get there, it'll be on your Zoom toolbar. But if you want to go in there, I'd love it if people could start chiming in the chat. Let me know where you're coming to us from. I want to know how far our global audience spreads. So I would love to see, where each of you are joining us from in the world today. I am coming to you from Toledo, Ohio. This is land that was indigenously occupied by the Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes in my area. So if you want to share where you're coming in from, let us know. If you know whose land you're on, send it in there. Now, the one thing I do want to highlight is if you don't want to participate, so once you're in the chat, kind of getting your feet wet there, please feel free to keep that chat moving. You are more than welcome and highly encouraged to interact with your fellow attendees, ask questions of our speakers, chime in, let me know, let us know, how do you feel about what we're talking about? Do you have a different lived experience? We would love to hear from you. So please feel free to keep that chat popping. I'll also be sharing links in there, as well as further information on some of the stuff we'll be talking about. Now, if you have a question or a comment that you would like me to ask, but you want me to keep you anonymous, not a problem. Just go ahead and DM me. You can find my name, Meg Alexander, in the dropdown in your Zoom group chat. Now, I'm happy to raise questions or comments. Please feel free to send them in at any time, truly, from now through the end of the event, and I'll keep reminding y'all, because we want you to drive today's conversation. Y'all submitted amazing questions before the event started, and so we want to make sure that we get to as many of those as possible. Now, if we are going over one of your questions and you think there's a little extra, extra context or details that we should know, maybe we're approaching the question from a completely different angle than the way you intended it, let us know in the group chat, or you can DM me, either way. But if you submitted a question and you're not sure if we'll get to it or not, ask it again in the chat. Y'all took the time out of your day to be here with us. We want to reward you for that. So when I mentioned the recording, like I said, we are live streaming this to our YouTube channel right now. And we are also live streaming to our website. And the big thing to know about the recording is that it works in your favor because you don't have to take notes. You get to kick back, relax, listen to the amazing conversations that I'm about to have with Jordan. And you don't have to worry about missing a reference that someone made or a link they shared, or a resource they mentioned. So you can always go back and rewatch these recordings at any time. Everybody that registered is going to get an email in about 1 to 2 business days, probably Friday-ish, that will have a link to where you can rewatch this recording on our website. Now, let's say Jordan says something just mind-blowing, amazing, like crazy. You can't believe you heard this. You cannot wait to share it with a coworker or a friend or relative. You don't have to wait 1 to 2 business days. You can head over to our YouTube channel. Again, I'll share links for all of this in the chat as we go. But you can head over to our YouTube channel and check it out there. Usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the live stream, the video will be posted. Now, there's a huge segment of our chat archive housed in that YouTube channel as well. So you can always go there, share videos with friends, direct people there if you'd like. But I really recommend that you check out our website as well. Our website has the entire archive, literally everything from the beginning, from the very first Lunch and Learn that Lauren Haggerty hosted, years ago. Everything is there. So you can check out all of those past resources and really take advantage of these. Now, last thing, Power to Fly's mission is big, right? I think that you all are just as passionate as we are in achieving our goals. We want to see true pay equity in the workforce. We want to see real diversity, representation, inclusion, belonging. We want our working worlds to look like our everyday lives. We want people to have fairness. We want gender parity. We want all of these things. I think y'all want them too. And if you want to help us with this mission, we would love to have you. Please feel free as we go during these events, take photos or video if you'd like, share out to your social network that you are learning with Power to Fly. We want to achieve our goals, and we really believe that the biggest way we can do this is to get these resources in the hands of as many people as possible. They are completely free. They are evergreen. You could always come back and check out everything on our website. And all we ask is that you have a profile. Really pretty low bar there, y'all. We really want to make sure that as many people have these resources as possible. So if you'd like to spread the word, please feel free. We would love to repost, retag, or not retag, reshare, retweet, whatever y'all send up. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can always use our hashtag Power to Fly. All right, y'all. Now that I've gotten the bulk of the boring stuff out of the way, let's go in and introduce you to today's speaker. So Jordan is the founder of 81 Cents, which helps historically excluded minorities to negotiate their pay through data collection and hands-on mentorship. 81 Cents was recently acquired by Rora, where Jordan now serves as general manager. Jordan holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as an MBA from the University of California at Berkeley. Outside of work, Jordan loves reading, rollerblading, and bad puns. Jordan, thank you for joining the stage today. I love that you love bad puns. Is there one that's particularly your favorite?
Thank you. Yeah, very happy to be here. So I actually have an entire Instagram account where I post pictures of small businesses I come across that have puns in their name. So I think probably my favorite was a hair salon I saw called Salon Dion, like Celine Dion.
Oh, that's excellent. I don't know if you were really a fan of MFM at all. I'm huge into the podcast, and one of their hosts talked about when she was a kid, there was a place near where she lived that was Sergeant Pepperoni was the pizza place.
Oh, and then there was so good.
There was another one that was apparently a big thing in California that was like a Panera sort of thing, but it was called Supremacy. Seems like a bad idea, but come on. The first person to read that sign had to be like, just a little bit, right?
That's incredible.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive into questions, I just want to follow up here. Is there anything else that you think our audience should know about you today? Anything about your background or anything you want to share with them before we dive into questions?
So I think the biggest thing is that I've been a negotiation coach for the past 5 years, probably helped over 1,000 or 1,200 people negotiate. So I've seen so many different kinds of negotiations. I've seen so many ridiculous antics from companies. I've seen, about everything under the sun, I think. I guess there's always something new you can learn, but yeah, I have a lot of experience helping people negotiate. And so I love talking about it. I love helping people think through their own situation. And hopefully the things I can share, people can feel confident that these are backed by, a good amount of experience.
Like it. Okay. And I think honestly, I can't express to you how excited I am for this topic, because I feel like this is one of the areas where outside of maybe business school, I was never taught how to negotiate. I was never even introduced to the concept of like, here's how you should talk about these things. And here's, reasonable expectations, how you research these things. So I'm really, really excited to dig in here. Now, one of the questions that we got asked a lot was kind of in the background about why is it important to negotiate? So if you're somebody who has not negotiated, let's say anything business-wise your entire career, why should you understand like the impact this can have on your career and on your job?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like most people are like, yeah, I know it's good to negotiate, but I think people don't necessarily realize the full extent of how important it is and how impactful it is. And there's two main things I think that come from negotiating. The first is like whatever you negotiate today impacts you, yes, today, but also everywhere everywhere your through your entire future as well. So like for example, let's say you get a base salary increase today and move your base salary from like 70K to 80K. Okay, you make 80K more in 2023. I mean 10K more in 2023, but then you also make more in 2024 and 2025 and all of that. Typically at the end of the year, companies will do an annual bonus. That's usually a percent of what you're making. And so if your base salary is higher, then that annual bonus you receive is going to be higher. A lot of companies do a 401k match where they put money into a retirement account for you. Typically, they do that based on a percentage of what you're earning today. So a company will invest 5% of your base salary into a retirement account. If your base salary is higher, they're investing more for you. Obviously, the more you take home today, also, the more you're able to put into savings and investment accounts, and the more those will continue to grow as well. And there's actually, there's a lot of research on this that shows that even doing as much as negotiating a 5K increase in your very first job that you have can result in a $1 million increase in lifetime earnings. And I actually have a quick chart I can show that kind of like illustrates that. But basically this idea that, your pay today compounds and continues to help you, throughout the rest of your career. Sorry.
Yeah, I remember hearing about this like pretty later on in my career. I think I was maybe 5 or 6 years into the working world, and hearing about this same idea and thinking like, well, yeah, compounding interest, this makes a ton of sense. And kind of having that reinforced, through things like my own budget, where like every drip makes a puddle. So it really, this was definitely not something that was on my radar when I first went into the business world. I don't think I'm alone in that.
Yep, exactly. So I think it's a best practice and something most people think is important, but the actual monetary impact, I don't think people realize how profound and important it can be. The other reason why I think negotiation is really important is because it actually gives you a chance to have an experience working with the company before you join. So how many people have had that experience where you get a job offer, you're excited, you get started, and within a week or two, you're like, oh my God, this is not what I was imagining. This is not a good place to work. This manager isn't someone who's going to support me. Having like a hard conversation around something like negotiation gives you a chance to see what it's like working with a company. And if you can't have like an open, respectful, communicative conversation with your manager, then how can you expect that it's going to be good to work with them? How can you expect that a year from now, they're going to go advocate for a raise or a promotion for you? So it's actually a chance to learn more about a company before you accept as well.
I think that's absolutely amazing. And you're right, definitely something that research would benefit you to have an idea of, have they had great shifts in these kinds of things over the years? So yeah, excellent. Okay. Now, one of the other questions we had was around basically like what is negotiable. So let's talk about some of the top 3 negotiable benefits of an offer. Okay, so let's say you've gotten an offer from some job that you want, you've interviewed, blah, blah, the offer letter has come. What are the top 3 negotiable benefits that we should be looking for?
Yeah, so I really maintain that most things are negotiable. And if you get something like, let's say you hear from a company like, okay, here's the base, the bonus, the stock, and then all of these benefits. And let's say like the benefits are lower than in the job you're earning right now. Like maybe the healthcare stipend isn't quite as much, or the healthcare coverage, or maybe they don't give you the same amount of investment into your retirement account. While you probably can't negotiate with a big corporation to like change their retirement matching policy, you can usually leverage that into a change somewhere else in your offer. So even components of your comp that aren't negotiable, you can still use those as leverage in other parts of the offer. But to get back to your original question, typically the things that are the easiest to negotiate, by far the easiest is adding a signing bonus. Usually that's something that recruiters have the ability to do without getting much more approval from the hiring manager or the compensation committee, depending on how big the signing bonus is. And companies typically like giving out signing bonuses because, unlike giving a base salary increase, this isn't money that they have to commit to paying you this year, next year, the year after. It's not going to impact your bonus or anything like that. It's just like a one-time payment. But from the professional side, negotiating a signing bonus is probably going to be less impactful for you financially because it is one-time payment, and most people don't realize, but the tax rate on a signing bonus is actually much higher than like your just kind of standard income tax rate. So that is typically the easiest thing to negotiate. The next easiest thing is if you're working in tech, typically stock or equity, as it's sometimes known, that is typically very negotiable. Companies typically like giving out stock because it basically means that you're excited to help the company grow. It doesn't necessarily cost them money today that comes out of their bank. Rather, it's them saying, here, we believe that you can be impactful in the company, and let's grow the overall value of this organization together. Stock is subject to something called vesting, which means that you don't get it all on day one. Rather, you typically get it over a 4-year timeline. So it de-risks it a bit for the company as well. And if you leave before those 4 years are up, you wouldn't get 100% of your equity. You would only get 50% or 75%, depending on how long you stayed for. And then base salary is the other area that's typically quite negotiable. This varies by company as well, but most companies will have a range of like a dedicated salary band that they're looking for the offer to fall within. And if you are not at the top of the band, then there's typically room to push the offer up. Non-monetary benefits are also typically negotiable. So start date can be really meaningful. Title is something that, if you're at a startup, companies are typically very flexible with. I was even talking to someone who was at Microsoft yesterday who said they got to basically pick what their title was, within like the range of realistic software engineering titles. So that's something that's typically negotiable. Often, comes up a lot these days, but hybrid versus remote versus in office, that can typically be negotiable as well. So I typically encourage candidates to think about compensation in terms of like 3 main categories. The first is like monetary compensation. So this is money that's coming in today or like, over the course of your employment that helps you put more money in the bank. Then there's near monetary compensation, and this is compensation that helps you. It may not put more money into your bank directly, but it helps you to save money. So for example, if your company has really awesome healthcare, then that's less money you need to spend on it. Or if they give you a gym stipend, now you don't need to pay for a gym. So it allows you to save more of your money. And then the last category is non-monetary. And these are things that people often overlook, but quite frequently have a really big impact on our job satisfaction and how meaningful we find our work.
Oof, I am loving all of this. And I'm seeing the chat, y'all are chiming in with some absolutely amazing questions. So I'm copying all of these down. I'm adding them to our doc. And so hopefully we will be able to answer as many of these as possible, but do not hesitate, y'all. If you've got questions, please keep sending them in. We want to know what you want to know today. Okay, so to cover a couple of the questions that we got in early, real quick, the first chart that you shared, do you have a data source for it? Somebody had asked about it and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget.
Oh, yes, I can send that. I mean, it's basically a chart that we made that said, okay, first person earns 50K, second person is offered 50K, but negotiates to 55. And then we used an annual compound interest rate and applied it over time. So I'm happy to share the original data there if they want to like DM me their email or something like that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay. So All right. We had a couple different questions about like, kind of the wording of how to start these conversations, or negotiation questions. Oh, okay. So this one got actually asked twice. So let's ask this one first. Natasha and Jeanette had both wanted to know, is it possible to negotiate an offer for a contractor role, especially when you may not be eligible for all the perks or benefits that permanent employees get? So this is a really good question. If you are freelance or if you are working in a contractor role for a company, how does that change, the landscape when it comes to negotiating?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a question I get a lot. I think a lot of people are exploring contract and freelance work right now. So I think the first question I would ask is like, are you negotiating with the company you're contracting with, or are you negotiating for like a agency that is kind of helping set up the contract, and kind of like understanding that can help give you indication for how negotiable the offer is or what parts you may be able to negotiate. If you're negotiating with like a third party agency, then making the case that like individuals who are at the company full time get these benefits might go over less well than if you're negotiating with the company directly. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing I would consider is if you ultimately want to convert the role to a full time role, or is the idea to be like a permanent contractor? So I think like internships are kind of a similar sort of thing where sometimes people are interning with the goal of, 6 weeks or 8 weeks from now converting into a full-time role. In that case, I usually say like, I wouldn't push too hard on negotiating now because you're going to be renegotiating in 2 months. And just right now, focus on doing an amazing job so that you have like maximum leverage when you do try to negotiate the full-time role. Similarly, if the idea is like this is like a 2-month contract and I'm ultimately trying to convert, then sure, you can negotiate a little bit more now, but like the long-term impact of that negotiation isn't going to be that meaningful. Rather, you're going to have a bigger negotiation 2 months from now. And so I would kind of like focus on getting ready for that. If it's not the case, and this is like contract work for the sake of contract work without the goal of converting, then I'd say like definitely focus on the negotiation now. Things that can be helpful are kind of like recognizing the cost savings that you're creating for the company, so they don't have to pay a lot of overhead for you. And so it means that like actually your pay should be comparable, if not higher, to the pay of a full-time employee, because for every full-time employee, company typically bakes in like 30 to 50% additional budget for like all the overhead associated with that person. If they don't have that overhead for you, then they should be able to pay you more and still have cost savings. So that's typically one benefit. And then the other thing is just to, if you're doing hourly work, to remember that like you're not always billing 40 hours a week. And so don't set your hourly rate based on working 40 hours a week. Set it based on working 20 or 30, and then figure out what your hourly rate needs to be from there. You can also negotiate like, okay, we'll do 2 months at this rate, and then I would like us to like renegotiate. We recently worked with someone who has done like 4-month contracts. He's an engineer. He's doing like data focused work. And every time his contract comes up, he increases it by like 20, 30%. And so, yes, there's a little bit of risk that they might not renew the contract, but he's really financially benefited from the fact that the contracts end every few months.
Okay, I have a selfish question when it comes to this. So if you are, when you're in a position like a freelancer or a contractor or something, especially if you're not affiliated with a separate org, there's, generally speaking, not a lot of things built in when it comes to, rate, like yearly raises, cost of inflation, the price of living, goes up, all that kind of stuff. If you feel like you're behind the 8 ball when it comes to this and you're being underpaid, let's talk about how you have that conversation when that what you think you need, that's got to be a big jump, basically. So what does this conversation look like if going into it that there's a lot of change that you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very real situation. And I think especially in today's market where cost of living has increased so substantially, like if your pay isn't changing, then suddenly you've fallen behind a lot. And so I think a lot of people are navigating similar kinds of conversations. I think it can be helpful to think about like what is unique to you and what is like everyone else kind of also navigating. So pretty much everyone is navigating cost of living increases right now. So while you can make that case to your company, they're probably less likely to give you a cost of living increase if they're not going to give it to everyone else, because everyone else is also dealing with that. That being said, if they think you're going to leave because of it, you have other opportunities on the table, hell yeah, they will give you a cost of living increase. But like, if they don't think that you're actually going to leave because of it, then they're probably not going to make an exception for you when it's something that every single employee is kind of navigating. So I would think about like, what do you uniquely bring to the table? What is your impact on the company? And how can you show that the value you're generating is, significantly higher than how much they're paying you? And let's say like you haven't gotten an increase for 18 months. Clearly the value you're creating for the company has probably gone up in those past 18 months. And so can you show what's changed and then use that to ask for an increase in pay?
Well, I love
the other thing that I'm obsessed with is the idea of what's called a BATNA. And in negotiation, that stands for best alternative to negotiated agreement. So it basically says like, if I don't take this offer, what am I going to do instead? So in the case of like, contract work, like if I don't renew this contract, what's my fallback? Or I get a new offer. If I don't take this offer, what am I going to do instead? Or if I don't get this raise, what's going to happen to me? The better or higher your BATNA is, the easier it is to ask aggressively and be really ambitious in what you're asking for. So if you feel awesome about like what you're going to do if this offer doesn't come through for you, or what you'll do if they don't give you that 30% increase that you want, then it's a lot easier to ask for it. A lot easier to ask for it because you know that like where you are today or your backup option is really, really good. So I think part of why people are really fearful in negotiating is because they don't like where they are today and it doesn't feel like workable for them. And so it creates like scarcity and urgency and fear of the offer going away. So I would encourage everyone to kind of think about like, what is your BATNA, both from a financial perspective and like an emotional perspective. And that can really change like the power you have in negotiating.
Ooh, okay. These are amazing, amazing tips here and like, tidbits that you're dropping. So thank you for this. I'm already bookmarking this chat to send to a couple of my friends.
Awesome.
Okay. Let's talk about the U.S. economy right now. Now, apologies to our world, our audience members outside of the U.S. But let's talk a little bit about the kind of trends that we're seeing in the economy. Do you think that negotiation power has decreased along with a lot of the kind of negative shifts that we've seen happen, especially in the last couple of years?
So definitely, I would say the economy impacts sort of the climate for negotiation. A year ago, it was like the wild, wild west, like make a massive ask, probably get it. It was, a lot easier for people to like line up multiple offers at the same time, which obviously can create leverage in negotiation. That being said, like we are still seeing that companies that are hiring are still negotiating. Those negotiations may look a little bit different, but there's definitely still like a lot of movement. And I mean, even this morning, I was talking to someone who got an offer 2 days ago. The recruiter checked in with them yesterday. They said, honestly, I'm not sure about it. Went to sleep, woke up this morning, and the offer had increased by $70,000 across the base and the signing bonus. So obviously, there is still a lot of movement in the market. Would that offer have increased by 90K a year ago? Maybe. It's hard to say, but like you're definitely still able to negotiate. And I'm seeing a lot of it happening. I'd say the best negotiations right now have like a couple of traits in common. The first is people are like being aware of the climate, right? So, being sensitive to the fact that like it is awesome to get job offers right now. And that's not something that like everyone is getting for them. And so if you're talking to like a hiring manager, for example, like maybe not even saying that head on, but just kind of like being mindful of that context, I think helps create like more of a respectful conversation. Second is getting more creative with asks. So definitely make like the big monetary ask, but if you're getting serious pushback on it and a company has said a couple times, like, this is the best that we can do, then I would think about like, what else can you ask for? So could you ask for an incentive-based bonus where if you hit XYZ targets 6 months from now, you get additional compensation? A lot easier for companies to agree to that because they only have to pay if they're actively, benefiting from your work. Equity is another good thing to ask for because with equity, again, like I mentioned, companies aren't like paying out of pocket up front. And so it can be easier for them to agree to that as well. And then the other thing I'm seeing people ask for is like, can we revisit this at the next like funding milestone? Or, 6 months from now, things should shift. Can we kind of bring my pay up to market then?
I like that. Okay. All right. So I'm keeping track of the chat here. I see we've got tons of questions coming in, so we'll try and get to as many of these as we can here. Okay. So let's talk about the negotiation on an offer, right? Especially if you only have one. We've talked about not wanting it to go away, that kind of thing. Is there anything else that people should know about negotiating when it comes to truly only one offer? Or anything you want to add to that, I guess, before we keep moving to our next subject?
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to share some slides again on this, but basically I just want to say that it's like really common to only have one offer. And I think as much as like negotiation articles and wisdom online says like you have all these offers and you leverage them against each other, the majority of people don't have like multiple offers at the same time. It can be really hard to line them up. That's one of the things like we actually do for our clients is kind of help advise them on like, here's how to pace out your interviews so that you can like line up multiple offers at the same time. But for the majority of people, like it doesn't always happen. And so that's very common. Let me share this quick slide on like all of the different types of leverage in a negotiation. So I'd say like most people think that having leverage to negotiate comes from having multiple offers. But actually we have a few different categories of leverage that we tend to talk about. So mindset, knowledge, and relationships. Like I mentioned, ultimately you have the most leverage in negotiation when you would be fine to walk away from the offer. That means that you can push for, what you really, really want, and know that you're okay without it. And this is a hard place to get to. There are oftentimes like really good reasons why you need to take a new role, whether it's for financial stability or to leave a toxic work environment. But also many people struggle with what we call like a scarcity mindset, which is, believing that if we don't take this offer, we'll never get another one like it. And so I think for a lot of people, it can be really helpful to like slow down for a minute and think about what would I actually do if I don't end up taking this offer, and realizing that like you'll probably be fine without it. Some of the other ways to create leverage can come from like having insider information. So for example, if you know that a company has been hiring for a role for 5 months, you've got a lot of leverage there because they likely really want to fill it. It's been a hard recruitment process. Every month that role is open costs them money. And so you can make a stronger case or a bigger ask because of it. So that's like one kind of leverage. Similarly, if you know that there are no other candidates in the pipeline for the role, then again, that's like more leverage for you. Another thing that we often recommend people do is create something called an impact roadmap. And this is basically working with your manager on like, here's kind of my 90-day plan for getting started in the role. Here are all my priorities. Here's what I'm going to focus on. A lot of people do this once they sign an offer and start work. And we actually recommend that people do it earlier because one, it gives you a chance to collaborate with your manager. But two, in doing this, you're getting even more buy-in from the hiring manager and basically showing them like, hey, I'm coming in to solve your problems. And then that can create more leverage for you because now the hiring manager like really, really wants you to join and is like even more bought in. So those are some of the other kinds of leverage that can be really helpful outside of having another offer. The other thing is sometimes even just mentioning you're in like interviews with other companies can, help create some like demand too.
I love it. Absolutely love this. Okay. All right. We're getting some really, really amazing questions in here. So a lot of people like 3, 4, 5 plus even just now have wanted to talk about who you should be negotiating with, like the hiring manager or the recruiter. So we got a couple different questions on this. I'm going to touch on some of the areas, and then you can, tackle whichever you'd like. One person wanted to know if it's a bad idea to attempt negotiations if a recruiter advises of a specific salary being budgeted, especially prior to an interview. And is it a bad idea to attempt negotiations? Oh, no, wait, I got that one first. Hold on, where'd the other one go? Should you discuss salary negotiations with the recruiter or wait until the interview and ask the hiring manager? What was the other one of this? Yeah, I think that's everybody that had asked about compensation first. Okay, so what do you say when it comes to this? Who should you be talking to?
Yeah, great question. So we get this question a lot, and the answer is like you want to be talking to both. Every company hiring process looks a little bit differently, but at the majority of companies, the recruiter is going to be kind of like leading the process, and they'll be kind of setting up conversations with you with the hiring manager and whatnot. But it's also important to realize that the recruiter actually doesn't have a ton of power to negotiate for you. The hiring manager is ultimately the one who's like responsible for the business outcomes, and they're the one that's going to say like, no, we need to go above band for this person. And so you really want to be kind of like parallel pathing. Typically, we recommend that you are kind of like responding to the recruiter, but getting kind of like permission and buy-in and support from the hiring manager for the actual negotiation. So I mentioned this idea of like an impact roadmap and kind of working with the hiring manager on kind of priorities. One thing that you can do like after that conversation or at the end of the conversation is let the hiring manager know, hey, the recruiter has been following up with me a lot. I wanted to let you know that I'm planning to talk to the recruiter about comp later this week. And I wanted to see if I had like your support to negotiate, or do you have any advice for me as I negotiate? And so that way you're kind of signaling to the hiring manager, I'm going to ask for more. So you might be asked to approve something, and seeing like, can they help you make the case, or do they have any guidance for you on how to do it? And so that way they're not surprised when the recruiter says like, hey, Joan is like pushing for more. Can we give it to her? And then similarly, like with the recruiter, you don't necessarily want to go around them because they do like manage a lot of the logistics and flow of the process. But you want to also recognize that like their job is to close you, and their job is to close you for the least amount of money they can. They don't make more money from you like taking a lower salary or anything like that, but like they want to close the deal and they want to get you in the door. And so they're going to push you, and they're going to use tactics in order to do that. You don't need to like comply by their timeline necessarily. Like it's a big decision to take a new job. It's really important, especially if you're trying to take a role where you can be for the next few years. And so most of what they're going to like share with you is like tactics to try to get you to sign faster.
All right, I like this. All right, now it's kind of secondary or tied into this question. A lot of people wanted to talk about the conversation around what is your expectation. So most of the tone was if there was a polite way not to disclose your expectation when you're first being asked for it. The follow-up questions we got were, does it put you at a disadvantage if you disclose the salary or not? When filling out the application, obviously you want to leave, if you do want to leave it for a later stage, it's usually so you could kind of have a little wiggle room there. A lot of people wanted to know, like, if you apply for jobs, you have to enter a minimum salary. So is there a rule of thumb to kind of make sure that you're in consideration and position yourself advantageously to have that salary talk down the road? So, okay, let's start at the top. Is there a polite way to not give the answer when they ask?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that you typically want to refrain from sharing a number because you probably don't have all of your information, all of your data yet, and the company likely has more data that they're pulling from than you do. And so especially you want to avoid sharing because you could like lowball yourself and then end up giving a number that's lower than what you actually think you should be paid for the work. The risk, a lot of people ask, like, what if I say a number that's too high? If you're having a conversation with a recruiter or hiring manager and you do share a number, they're going to tell you if it's too high. And you'll have a chance to decide like how to move forward then. But typically, like, I would encourage you to think about like, if you're sharing the number that you want to get and they say they can't make that work, isn't that better to know sooner rather than later? And should you really be moving forward with that process? That's a little bit of a digression because I still maintain that you really shouldn't say. And so one of the best ways to kind of defer is just saying that, like, I'm still in the interview process. I'm still learning about the role, still getting understanding of the market rate for it. And so I don't have an exact number to share right now. However, if you have a range that you're hoping to stay within for the position, that would be really helpful to hear. So you can kind of like turn it back on them. The other thing you could do is like, say you're really focusing on like fit and role and all of that. And then once you are like confident on that, then you'll be able to talk about the numbers. So those are typically two ways to defer. One reason why you would want to say a number is if you're going from like the for-profit sector to the nonprofit sector, or like changing functions in a way that you are expecting your comp to decrease. Anchoring with like your expectations or where you are today can be helpful, but that's like really the only case where I would recommend you say a number. Typically, I think it only hurts you. And then in terms of like the application, if you are getting a salary question there, so I would say put a dash, put like N/A. If you can like put numerical inputs. If you have to put a numerical input, you could put like 0, you could put 1, like whatever. You're just like trying to
just something to fill the slot.
The question. I think the bigger point I would want to make there is that for most people and for most roles, I recommend where possible trying to do a networked job search. So I spoke to a candidate last week who said that she's worked at companies like Instagram, Apple, and is in the process of shifting to a startup. And she has never gotten a job from an online application. It's always been through a networked application, and she's never had to fill out the online application for any of those roles. She hadn't even updated her resume in like 7 years because she had never been required to like share a resume for any of her most recent roles. And so I would encourage everyone to kind of try where possible to go through a networked approach for job opportunities. And that would allow you to avoid that, question about what number do you need to see.
I like that. I know that there's definitely been an outcry from from job seekers many times over the years for pay transparency, even when it just comes to what you're showing on the website, right? The pay for this job is between blank and blank. And that way, at least you can say like, hey, this isn't going to work for me, and not waste your time and not waste the employer's time. Since that's not, a widespread thing, and it's not yet the way we want to see it, do you think that asking the question, in regards to, would you extend this kind of transparency so that we can make sure that we're not wasting each other's time? Do you think that's a good way to approach that? Or do you think it's better to not try and start that conversation until they touch the subject?
I think it depends. I think every role is a little bit different. And if you are applying for a role at like a startup, for example, where pay could like vary really widely, then it might make sense to start that a little bit earlier, just to make sure that, like you don't want to waste their time if they can't get anywhere near where you're hoping for. If you're applying for a role that's like a level up at, Google or something, I think you can assume that the comp is probably going to be pretty solid. And I probably wouldn't start that conversation earlier, because that only forces you to kind of be clear about like what number you're looking for as well. So I'd say it is like a little bit case dependent.
Okay. I love your advice to kind of not necessarily fall back, but I'm trying to get a better understanding of the role or something like that. That's usually what my go-to has been, is like, I want to learn a little bit more about the role and the responsibilities that you want it to entail, because it'll be different than what I'm doing now. So I want to learn a little more about that first. It's worked so far. I've only had to pull it out like 2 or 3 times, but other friends of mine have used it as well. So if that works for you, take it and run with it, y'all. Okay, so we had other questions that came in during the chat like early that were not necessarily like on the track we were. So I want to make sure we try and get to some of those as well. Jessica had asked early, sometimes the highest paid employees are also the first to be let go, especially in, unfortunate economic times, especially as we face a potential recession. What is the best way to factor this in when negotiating? So if you know that you've got to be up, near the ceiling, or you've got to be up above a lot of the other employees, what role should that play when you're thinking about negotiating?
So I would say that if you get an offer and you're trying to negotiate for like 20, 30% more, I don't think that's going to put you at a higher risk of being let go if your performance is awesome. Like, I don't think companies necessarily think about it like that. If you've pushed for a 2x increase or a 3x increase, then sure, maybe that is like significantly more budget than they'd be able to agree to. But usually employers are going to tell you that in the negotiation rather than like bring you on 6 months later, be like, ooh, economy's tough. You negotiated for a lot, so we have to let you go. Especially at like smaller companies, a lot of employers will ask their employees, especially like the highest paid ones or the, most senior leaders, like, hey, like, would anyone be willing to take a decrease to help us like kind of manage costs better or something like that? And so, yeah, I wouldn't be worried about putting yourself in a position through negotiating where you are more likely to be laid off. I think one of the best things you can do, try to figure out through the interview and negotiation process is this role stable within the company? Is this a team that is doing important work? Does the leadership team believe in this role and the work that the team that I'm joining is doing? Does this manager have credibility within the organization? Those are some of like the best things you can learn through negotiating. And if you get a signal that any of those aren't true, then I'd say there's some risk for joining the company, but it's probably not because you negotiated 10 or 15% more.
Yeah. Okay. So while I'm thinking about this, then would you say it's just as important to think about negotiation in terms of other things besides dollar figure? Would you say that that's important not only at the beginning of your career, but also towards the end? If you are more senior and you're worried about being let go, something like a lower salary might be something you could swallow if you get something else. If you negotiate for something else of benefit to you, that the company that's not going to impact company's bottom line. More flexible hours, some of the stuff you were talking about earlier. So do you think that is just as important for seniors as it is for people coming in fresh?
Yes, definitely. And I would say, like, even if you looked at it from like a purely financial lens, let's say I negotiate for, $250,000, but I join a company that isn't going to be around 9 months from now. I'm not seeing very much of that 250K, right? Like, I am not going to get all the bonuses that were promised to me, all of that. Like, it's very short-term impact. Whereas if I join a company that has serious growth potential and I take 200K, but a year from now I get a 30% increase and a 50K bonus. Next year I get a 20% increase and a 75K bonus. Like, 4 years from now, my earnings have like vastly surpassed that 250K that I might take now. So we always try to encourage people to think a little bit longer term. And that's why I kind of harp on these questions about like, is this team, credible within the organization? Does this manager have clout? Because if you work for good people on a good team that's doing important work, you will grow and your pay will grow with it.
Okay. All right. Now, Himanshu had a really great question in the chat. I don't know that you'll be able to give us a specific answer here, but they had asked, is it a good approach to ask 10K on over their max budget, or would that put you into, in the position of not getting the offer? So let's talk about things like, if they give you a number and you need to counter above it, are there any guidelines of like, start with 5% or round numbers or whatever? Or is this also kind of a it depends situation?
So I would say it depends. I wouldn't say like, 5% is enough, but 10% is asking too much. I think part of what I always encourage people to do is like not necessarily assume that the limits they've told you are the limits they told you. So like, for example, a company like Amazon has salary bands. They will go above the band for a candidate. So if the recruiter says like, we're at the top of the band, we're at the top of the band, they are probably telling you the truth. And it also doesn't mean you couldn't get more. I think I would encourage you to think about, what is the ask for? Why are you making it? Is it just asking for the sake of asking? Or is there like a real reason why you need that additional 15K to feel really excited about the role? If you genuinely would be willing to walk away from it without that, then like by all means ask. If it is really important for you, if it makes the difference between you joining and feeling okay about it versus joining and feeling like really excited about it, then I would definitely ask. But I wouldn't say there's like one number that's like too much or too little per se. It's, yeah, I mean, 10K of 100K is 10%, whereas 10K of 50K is 20%, right? Like same number can be perceived really differently.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about non-dollar figure negotiables. Nick had asked if you wish to negotiate a notice, like to add a notice period to your contract, like 3 months instead of, or 6 months instead of 3 or something. Is this something that you have seen be negotiated, or should that qualify as a negotiable term?
Yes, definitely. And we've been doing a lot of work around helping people negotiate severance. There are
Yes, that was Jen's question too.
Yeah, so there are multiple points at which you can negotiate. You can negotiate it when you're joining a company, like a notice period or pre-severance, it's often called. Typically, that's helpful to frame it as like, I think it's important for us to talk about what we'll do here if this doesn't work out. My full intention is to go into the role and do everything that's possible to be really impactful and make it work. However, I've had enough experience to know that we should also talk about what happens if that's not the case. And given, my niche skill set and whatnot, I want to make sure that I'm protected in the event that it doesn't work out. And I think it's typically reasonable to, make some sort of ask in terms of like number of months of pay. You could talk to people in similar roles to get a sense of like what's reasonable for someone at your level. Then you can also negotiate severance. Actually, if you decide to leave the company, this is something most people don't know about, but typically for, high visibility roles, high impact roles, senior level roles, giving a company 2 weeks notice isn't really helpful. And so you could go to them and say like, hey, I am planning to leave. And, I have another opportunity, or I need time for myself, or whatever the reason may be. And I know that, kind of managing the optics around this and making sure there's a smooth transition is probably really important. And so I wanted to offer to, instead of just giving you 2 weeks, to give you 6 weeks notice in exchange for some additional severance after that, or to do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times companies are happy to do that because it allows them to control the narrative and gives them more time to find a replacement. And then the last opportunity for severance negotiation is, when you are let go of or laid off. And that's something we've been helping people with a lot, unfortunately, given the current climate. And typically the policy there, or like market rate there, is 1 month of severance per year of employment. And so if you are offered far less than that, then it can be worth negotiating. You could also negotiate other things like, can I keep my laptop? Can I keep my monitor? Can I keep all these office things you sent me? You could also negotiate like career coaching or extended healthcare benefits or things like that. Typically, in the event of needing to negotiate severance when you're laid off, I would recommend that you go to, a senior leader at the company and try to make a case for them directly, instead of just like sending an email into like hr@company.com kind of thing. And I would just share there that like typically companies negotiate when they believe that you could create like reputational risk for them or litigational risk. And so if you are, a member of like a protected class, then a company might like take that more seriously, for better or for worse. So I'm also happy if anyone is considering like severance negotiations, I'd be happy to chat with them.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We did have a couple of people that asked what severance was. If you're still unsure, one of the quick things that I was researching is that yes, it's pay that you get once you leave a company, but the primary reasons for offering it on an employer side would mostly be like to soften the blow if you get terminated involuntarily or to avoid future lawsuits. A lot of the time, if you get a severance package, you're asked to like sign a release or something. So just to prevent the possibility of them maybe, having issues with it in the future. But it's not uncommon. I mean, I've absolutely seen it happen. A lot of people got them after there were layoffs late last year. So, it's not an uncommon thing, but it's completely normal if you've never encountered it, because a lot of us, might not be at that level yet where we would have. Okay, so it's 1:56. With this time always goes way too quickly. So I want to make sure that we saved at least a little bit of time here. What do you want to leave our audience with? Where can they get in touch with you? Where can they follow and see what you've got going on? What do they need to know to maintain ties after today's event's over?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is typically the best way to connect with me. I just put my profile link in the chat. And I think in terms of what I would try to leave people with is, over the past 5 years of building a UN Sense and doing hundreds of coaching sessions, I have seen a ridiculous number of lowball offers, terrible behavior from companies, really like disrespectful communication, honestly bullying. But I have also seen so much negotiation success from like the shyest, most introverted, most unlikely of negotiators. And I know if, those folks can do it, everyone here can do it too. And I think that, really this is a hard thing for anyone to do, but there are certain groups of people who struggle with it more because of lack of exposure, because this is their first time working in tech and they've never met anyone who's worked in tech before, or because they're the first, college grad in their family or first generation, American or something like that. And so
you could even just be outside an industry, you could be in a different industry than where your family is. And then it's a completely new field.
Yes, absolutely. And so I would say that for everyone, it's not only important for us to like practice and to do it, but also for us to talk about it and to share kind of our learnings with people who are more junior than us or who may not have kind of the same access that we do.
Yes, I absolutely love this. I mean, it's very akin to, there was like an Adam ruins everything thing on College Humor years and years ago about pay transparency and how it benefits the workers, it doesn't benefit the employer kind of thing. And it opened up a lot of conversations that thankfully we're still having. But it'd be nice if we maybe didn't have to have the exact same conversation. We want to keep moving that ball forward. All right, Jordan, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This has been wonderful to get a chance to learn from you. I have really, really loved spending this afternoon learning from you. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thanks to everyone for such awesome questions.
All right, y'all. We have got some other amazing events happening for you coming up even just this afternoon. I'm hosting another chat starting at 3 p.m. Eastern about journey mapping to achieve your next move. So if you are similarly looking to make some changes or get things moving in 2023 for your career, I absolutely recommend you to come by and check that out. We've got some other great programming coming up in the coming weeks. And don't forget, our first virtual summit of the year is going to be starting February. It's going to be the first week of February. So definitely check that out. Thank you so much for joining us all today. And thanks to our YouTube viewers. So happy to have you. I hope that if this was your first Power to Fly event, it will not be your last. And if you are one of our frequent flyers and we see you all the time, thank you so much for coming. I love seeing all the familiar faces. Have a safe, happy, healthy rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you back here on another event soon. Bye.